Can we go back
Yeah.
to control for a second?
So you covered the circumplex model and values and rituals and spiritual practice. We'll probably come back to that, but what we really want to get back to is control and connection. We were talking about how the control paradigm ultimately fails,
Some downsides.
the downsides to it. And we were talking about how it's demotivating, it's extrinsic, and it can create lying and rebellion. It doesn't teach self-awareness or self-control. It models bad behavior on the part of the parents. It kills intimacy. It's not fun. And I'm just going to say, just personally, that I retained my very controlling, punishing, fear-based approach to parenting long after I lost my Orthodox Mormon belief, especially with my daughter Maya. I was always about curfew, about who are you with and what boy are you with, and I'm scared you're going to have sex, and don't have sex, and don't you make out, and how long are you in the car, and did you go parking somewhere, and you're 5 minutes late for your curfew, and I don't want him around, that sort of, and I'm probably mischaracterizing how I was.
You had some really wonderful moments of showing up as well.
But it's certainly in my mind and in my emotions, I was feeling all those things. And the downside of that is that it taught Maya, number one, that sexuality is scary, that it's dirty, that it's bad. And like Esther Perel says, you bring that dirty sexuality into your marriage, right? But it was a fear mentality. It made her scared all the time. It made her relationship stressful. And most importantly, it killed my intimacy with Maya for a while, where Maya felt like she probably couldn't be fully honest with me. She felt scared to tell us the truth. She didn't want to share her happy experiences with us. If she was sexual, let's just say theoretically, she certainly wasn't going to want to talk to us about that. And ultimately, it led to a position where she wasn't always safe, where she might get herself in situations that she wouldn't have wanted to get herself into, or that she would need help getting out of, but because she felt scared and not close to me or us, she probably, wasn't always as safe as she could have been if she could have called us at any time or talked to us at any time about anything. Do you know?
Yeah, so there are a couple things in there that I would love to highlight. And the first thing is, another aspect of control that is difficult is that you may control behavior on the surface, but oftentimes it drives those behaviors underground. And that is what ultimately, I think, so then you have split your child into behavior that they may show around you, and then you've got the behavior that happens kind of in the dark or, underground. And so just for an overall healthy paradigm, that's something that's probably not so desirable. So this idea of, driving behavior underground. And then yes, on some level, without going into detail, Maya, as an explorer, as someone who was very, very lit up and alive with her life, very much a developmentally appropriate young woman. I do feel like what you also sacrifice is when your child may be facing something large or uncertain, or they're less apt to trust you with it. If that behavior if your relationship is defined by judgment and kind of obedience, and then you will not have influence. You will not have, the relationship where they're confiding and you're able to be there for them. They, at times in life when they may need you, are more left alone. And that is something that we have really, really come to value. Maya was our teacher that way. And we have shifted a lot of things from our experience with Maya as the amazing human being that she is. So a little side on that. So
yes. So that's, for all those reasons, that's why that's why control from our perspective isn't the optimum model. So now, if it's not control, what is connection? What is connection, Margi and Natasha? How do you know if you have it? How do you foster it? And what are the benefits? Do you want to go
Well,
first?
before we go into that, can I just share a few
Yeah,
thoughts on
please.
what you just said? First of
Please.
all, there's a quote that I just shared actually on my Facebook page. It's more about partners and sexuality, but Ellen Bader, PhD, says when you forbid a partner from doing something, you invite them to keep a secret.
Yes.
And I think that that is very much what you're talking about. And I think as parents, it's hard to balance that, because then you're like, well, am I just supposed to be okay with anything and anything goes? And we're not talking about that. And I think that's what we'll get into with connection type parenting. So I'm not going to go into that very much right now. But I also want to say that the research has been very clear that when they talk to trauma survivors, sexual assault survivors, especially women, and they ask why they did not tell their parents or their father in particular, it's because they were afraid of the reaction the father would have about either the perpetrator, and that then the father would get in trouble by going and killing this guy, or, you know, hurting this person or something along those lines. So in other words, they did not trust their parent to be able to handle the information of their pain and suffering. And that is profound when you think about what we want to be as parents. You know, if our kids have the idea that you can't handle my truth, you can't handle my thoughts or my ideas or my behaviors, then we do invite this sense of secrecy and the sense of just being kind of divorced from huge aspects of our children's lives. And that's just, I think we just have to decide to choose. Do I want to have authority and accountability, or do I want to have conversation? You know, do I want to have trust? And you really can't have both. So you kind of have to decide which approach you're going to take. Now, when I make mistakes, because I don't always stay in my trust space, I do repair attempts. I go back and tell my kids, I lost it. I'm sorry. I reacted stronger than I would want. And so hopefully I'm regaining that trust, because you're not going to be perfect at this whole process.
So important. I just, not to plug my own blog, but I just did a post on apologizing to children as a
You
conscious.
should plug your own blog. There's nothing, you know what, by the way, here's a thought I have. This is totally tangential. We constantly apologize for plugging our own stuff and for making money. I want to do a podcast on that, John.
Word.
Whoa, Natasha's
okay.
unleashed.
We just went somewhere different. Sorry. Let's releash me.
Reel it back in.
Anyway, the power of an apology, especially as parents to our children, it is, you know, we want to embody again this idea that we are all journeying, we're all imperfect, and what it looks like to make a mistake and take responsibility for it and learn from it. And so I love that you brought that up.
And just as a capstone little story that gets kind of heavy really quick, and it just is a reflection of things we've already talked about. I'm able to talk about this because our daughter Maya has talked about this publicly. So I'm just going to just lay this down. For me, this real moment of truth came one night when Maya attended a party and had an experience that led to a sexual assault. And she's talked about this publicly. And I'm just going to say, you know, there's a lot we could talk about there, but the thing I'm going to say is I learned from that experience that if I don't know that I could have fully prevented that. Sexual assaults happen, you know, in all sorts of scenarios with parents doing right and wrong things. What I know for sure is that Maya didn't feel comfortable when she got into a tough situation reaching out, and that left her in a vulnerable spot. And so I took away from that experience a renewed resolve to love and make my kids feel safe first, so that regardless of what situation that they got in, especially if they were in an unsafe or an unhealthy situation, what I wanted them to feel is safe telling or calling us to help us make them safe. Again, that's a really serious, heavy thing that I just kind of dropped there. But if it helps you remember the importance and the stakes the stakes can be really high. What you want is your kids feeling safe with you. You want your kids feeling comfortable telling you everything. And you want your kids feeling like no matter what situation they're in, they can either tell you or call you to get support. And there's real risks if you don't have that. So we've talked a lot about the downsides of the control model. Really quickly, Sean Escobar, shout out to Sean. We just interviewed Sean and his wonderful wife, Crystal Escobar.
Amazing interview.
Want to be balanced. Sean's been featured recently in the New York Times about his confrontation of a child, of an adult who sexually abused him as a child. Sean writes, my relationship with my 13-year-old daughter is at a critical tipping point. I have to be conscious of what I do and don't do. My relationship with her is the most precious consideration at this time. Sean, thanks for your vulnerability and your awareness. And this conscious parenting doesn't come natural to people raised Mormon and who have been parenting as Mormons for a long time. So Sean, that's why we're all in this together, to kind of help each other. Sean goes on to write, how do these kids grow up so fast? I didn't see this coming. I thought I had a few more years to lie back. Nope, time for me to grow.
Oh, I love that. I love that, Sean.
And that's what Shefali Saber says. Margie's already said it. Children are our best teachers by far. I mean, I'd say spouses are really good teachers, but in addition to spouses, children are phenomenal teachers. In all the ways we need to grow, in all the ways that we have good skills, super important. Lisa writes, acceptance and understanding by listening can build a trust and safe place.
Yes.
Absolutely.
We're going to talk more about that in a minute.
Okay, so Margie, what is a connection? How do we develop it? And then Natasha, I'll bring you in.
Yeah.
How do we know if we have it? What is it? What is this elusive thing called connection?
Yeah, so, connection starts with a connection with ourselves in any given moment. But it's also a genuine desire to connect with our child's experience. And I find that it's easier to talk about this in practical terms, to take a situation where you might normally use control and replace it with connection. And that because I'm so practical, and our podcast is also practical, we could do that if you feel like that would be helpful.
Let me start. You put something out there just so essential, and I don't want to jump by it. You said it starts, connection to our children begins with connection to ourselves. That's something that you would hear a guru say or a coach. What does it mean?
To connect with yourself.
And why is that important?
Okay,
for a parent to be connected with their kid.
If we fail to connect with ourselves in a moment, then we are more apt to act unconsciously, to react to a situation, right? And to have our children hold something that they shouldn't hold, meaning a wound or a reaction or a state of being that truly in their world, they are not prepared to hold. It's not even in their sphere. So that's why we connect with ourselves, to be able to take responsibility for our own emotions, which is what we're wanting our children to learn to do. So that embodiment is there. So let's take a situation where, maybe you're wanting your child to participate in cleaning up the table, okay? And your child is rolling their eyes, maybe. Let's say a son, he's rolling his eyes at you. Or a controlling thing would be like, you know what? You can do this. I've done things all day. You can.
Don't you look at me that way?
Yeah,
How dare you?
Don't roll your eyes. It's disrespectful.
Don't show me disrespect.
Pick your version. Pick your version of what words are said.
Oh, is it hard for you to set the table, or is it hard for you to clean the table? I cleaned the table when I was a boy.
Or if you don't clean the table, I'm going to take away your phone. Give me your phone. Or all of those are kind of control. A connection model would be like, oh, I noticed.
Are they frozen again?
Are we?
You were for a minute.
Oh no.
I was going to have to throw another party.
No.
I was worried.
So are we back? Yes?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay. So anyway, to go with the connection model really quick, what it involves.
Okay, wait, can I add something to that?
Yes.
So when you talk about connection to self, this is true not just in parenting, but also in relationships. We come to parenting wounded. We come to marriages wounded, whether it was a controlling parent or a verbally abusive parent or an emotionally abusive parent or negative emotional codependencies, right?
We also come
traumas
with a template. We have been shown the way. We have had experiences that have shown us a map, if you will, that if we aren't conscious, then oftentimes we unconsciously will act upon what we've experienced, right?
Right. And so the reason why self-control, self-understanding is so important, self-awareness for parenting, is if you can get to understand your triggers, your traumas, your unhealthy coping mechanisms, your unhealthy codependent patterns, the extent to which you do that work to understand the mess that you're bringing to the parenting, the easier it is for you to recognize that and then to not introduce all that mess to your child and pass it on.
Absolutely.
That's why you have to do that work.
Yes. And an obedience model oftentimes is a way for us to have the feeling that what we say matters, that what we want and need matters, and that we are heard, right? So being aware of that in the model of what we're really looking for, that allows us to connect with the idea of, how would we react in a similar situation? Our children are no different than we are in their emotional experience of things, in how they value their own autonomy and have a desire for wanting to create their own lives. And so to bring it back to that situation, connection involves a lot of questions. It would be like, oh, I'm noticing, are you feeling like a little bit of pushback right now? Can you tell me about that? What are you feeling right now? Maybe your child would then say, I have a headache. I've got a bad headache. I've had a hard day. It humanizes them. It differentiates them from you. And from there, you can choose to connect with them. I'm sorry you have a headache. I'm sorry you've had a hard day. And then from there, you are not in this fight control position anymore. And you can decide what you want to do with that, right? You can decide at that point, and we can talk about this with enlightened boundaries, how you want to respond. But what you're not is unconscious. What you are not is just reacting in that moment. Obey me. Yeah, we'll clean up the table. Yeah, well, where your child is not real to you in that situation.
Yeah, reactive anger and vehement speaking out of anger, punishing out of anger, all of that is toxic to connection. And so if you can't manage your triggers, be aware of your triggers, manage your own stuff, you're just going to bring a bunch of mess to your relationship and kill the intimacy.
So the two things to really be aware of when you find yourself in situations where you're noticing anger come up or there's a power struggle is to first connect with yourself. What am I experiencing? What am I feeling? Right? And to check that. And then get curious about your child. And one easy thing to do to connect is to just observe. I noticed this. Do you want to tell me about that? I'm noticing that, I feel like a little bit of impatience from you. What are you feeling right now? What's going on right now? And this is something that is a normal response for things that you would term as like rudeness or, our children get to differentiate and have moods and have feelings, and so it's a way to connect with what's going on. And then the gift is they connect with themselves. They are self-aware in that moment. Maybe they didn't even know they were being rude, but it gives them this information in a safe place. Hey, I'm noticing this. This is coming up. You seem a little short. You want to tell me about it? Do you need space? Do you need,
I love it. Natasha, we need to give you a chance to jump in here. What do you think about what we're saying so far?
I think it's really good. I have a lot of different thoughts. And then of course, when you give me the minute, I'm like, wait, what was I thinking? I think, one of the ways that I try to tune people into this is the use of our bodies. A lot of times our bodies are great clue givers, and it's hard to stay in tune with our bodies when we've been taught to be so intellectual about things, and we stay kind of in our cerebral space. So what is your gut telling you? What is your heart rate telling you? What is your neck and your shoulders telling you? You know, what is your facial expression telling you? And so as you clue into your own kind of body that is letting you know I'm stressed, or I'm anxious, or I'm upset, or I'm frustrated, you can also not just, you know, ask questions to your kids, but role model that by expressing your own stuff. Like right now, as I'm sensing some pushback from you, I'm noticing I'm getting frustrated. I'm noticing that because I can feel this tension in my shoulders, you know, and so as I ask you about it, I can also role model how to talk about it from my own perspective, and hopefully build empathy from them as well, because maybe you also have a headache, but you've been doing lots of things all day long, and, you know, is it okay just because we have a headache to not, you know, fulfill our responsibilities or things like that? And this is also where it can come back to the family values exercise, where you have values around work, around home chores. What does it mean to be part of a family system? What does it mean to live with other people? What types of responsibilities should we share? And how do we make sure that it's fair and egalitarian? How do we, again, kids, especially preteens and teens, really like research-based reasons, not, well, God told us so reasons. So, I mean, you can share that, you know, some of the biggest reasons for divorce and separation and even roommate struggles are unfairness of egalitarianism in chores, right? And so if mom's always the one picking everything up, or dad is, or a certain kid is better at that than all the other kids, how does that fit into our family values? So that you're having those discussions prior to the conflict, but then in the moment of conflict, you can bring up, like, remember when we talked about this, how does that fit into this situation where you have a headache or you've had a long day? Do you think that it would be okay to swap, you know, your chores with your brother, but then you take on their chores, you know, the next day? Or like, what are some solutions that you can help them come up with that aren't just, well, like, this is what you have to do?
Yeah,
that's a big part of this.
It is a huge part of it. And it does kind of fall back then to, which is the idea of the family culture, creating a family culture and kind of this paradigm that everyone sort of participates in. Yeah, a number of comments are coming in around younger children. So I thought I would just say something really quickly. Lindy writes, yes, I have a 5 and 3-year-old, not the easiest to have a logical, rewarding conversation with pint-sized ones. And that's true. I think with younger kids, I'm just going to kind of focus right there. Oh, and Christy writes, how do you deal with this when they're very small? I know my 3-year-old needs some structure and rules in her life, but she's not quite old enough to understand why she needs structure and why there are rules. Yes. So, and this is going to kind of fall into the enlightened boundaries. So conscious parenting is, one of the myths around it is that there's no structure, that it's like child-led, that, you know, and that is just simply not true. How that's negotiated and how boundaries are held and created and communicated, it can be quite different than the control paradigm, but it is not that there is no structure. So the one thing that I just wanted to bring out with young children is, you know, and John Gottman has a book about this that you can look up on, it's something around emotions, teaching your children, you know, the value of emotions. And really when children are small, all your main idea is this connection with what they're feeling. So again, it can be questions, it can be noticing, it can be actually providing space, it can be understanding their natures to know, you know, maybe they get overwhelmed at the grocery store and how to kind of meet their personalities there. This is all conscious parenting, that you're connecting with the child they are, but it's as simple as, you know, I notice, are you feeling angry? I notice that are you feeling upset? What are you upset about? And really in this way, having a very egalitarian, accepting approach of all emotions. Because what tends to happen in parenting is we tend to approve of the positive ones and want to time out or isolate or, minimize the emotions we perceive as more negative, anger, tantruming, and what you want to do I feel like the whole kind of focus for young children is an awareness of emotions. And so Natasha's body kind of connection to body is very much that way. Being able to name the emotion and then having them eventually grow into identifying emotions they're having and being able to work through those emotions by saying, do you need space? What can I do? Do you need a hug? Do you need, and not like kind of rushing in to necessarily punish because your child is sad at the grocery store, or if that makes sense. So that's just one thing I wanted to bring out, is just sort of this idea of familiarizing your children with their emotional terrain and not unknowingly biasing that our children have that positive emotions are good and that there are negative emotions that they're not, welcome. We try to really minimize, or kind of put you away in your own space when you have those, if that makes sense.
Yeah, don't ask the kid to do something that you have no control over, right? Like, stop crying. Like, they may not have control over that, and you definitely don't have control over, don't ask your kid to do something that you have no idea what the result is going to be. So if you notice the crying or the tantrum, you can create spaces for that. You can try to say, well, that's okay. It's okay for you to be angry. Let's go do that in this particular space, or ignore it for a while, or, there's lots of different tactics, but to just flat out try to dictate, stop this particular, or don't feel that way, or stop doing this, it's just not something that is necessarily in their control, and definitely not in your control. So you're going to start a control battle that you're going to lose. So why put yourself in that position?
And really, connection can really help here. If your child is repeatedly having issues at the grocery store, looking at things like timing or their personality. Do they need a list? Do they need to play more of a part, during that? Do you want make sure they're well fed? I mean, just kind of really considering your child as a human being, as a person that's worth considering, as opposed to kind of fall in line with my structure. And if you have a problem with that, I'm going to have a problem with you. Yeah.
I'll just give my quick amen to everything Natasha and Margi have said. My quick answer to Lindy and to others who asked about little kids, Rochelle and Christy, a couple things. Number one, self-compassion, like we started out. I really love the thing Natasha said. If you do mediocre job at parenting, you're a success. Remember that. Accept to some level you are going to mess up and screw up your kids. You are going to lose your temper. You are going to be impatient. So a lot of that just self-acceptance with little ones and big ones. But I also want to say, remember that it's very easy to minimize the importance of what our kid is thinking and what they have to say. That we tend to think that as parents, we know what's right and what's best, and we tend to think we know what our kids should do. But our kids, and so it's easy to run roughshod over what they think and feel and want inside. Mm-hmm. And what I want to just plant a seed in you, for those of you who aren't tuned into this, is that oftentimes, even at 3 or 4 or 5 years old, your kids understand themselves a lot better than you think. Your kids have thoughts and feelings deeper than you would think. And they often know things about themselves. They know more about themselves or about others than you think. And so, Lindy and others, if all you do is just get in the habit of just taking a little bit more time to, like Margi said, ask those questions, ask them what they're thinking, ask them what they're feeling. Number one, you'll learn more about them. And number two, you'll teach them to be more reflective, to look more internally, to be more thoughtful, to become more emotionally intelligent. And all I'm saying is you may not always have time to do it. It may not always work out successfully, but just the practice of trying to remember to check in with them, to ask them what they think, what they feel, to give them the practice of expressing it. I'm just saying that even if it doesn't have the outcome you want in any particular situation, just the discipline of practicing, nurturing with them their own intellectual and emotional awareness, I believe will pay dividends. And it will in the end help you guys work out a better system. With Winston, I'm learning this, that Winston
is 15.
Winston's 15, and so I'm kind of changing the subject, but maybe not really. Winston, he is really his own person. He really has his own set of values. He is motivated when he's doing something aligned with his own values, but if you try and force him to do something that isn't aligned with his values, either he's going to do it half-heartedly, or he's going to grumble, or he's going to defy you, or he's going to disconnect and not want to be around you. I'll give you a perfect example. So we were out with a family member at dinner, and it didn't seem like Winston was having a great time. And so we talked to him later about that. And we're just like, hey, you should always, you should always be engaged with everyone that you're with all the time. And Winston's response was, I didn't really want to be there. And that
relationship isn't.
This particular family member hasn't always resonated with me. And so I believe in showing what I'm feeling. I don't believe in showing that you're happy and engaged when inside you don't feel that way. And that was we could have just punished him for being disconnected at dinner, or gotten mad at him, or made him feel bad, or lectured him. And we probably did a little bit of that. But once we asked him what he was thinking and feeling, and he was able to express, number one, that idea that I don't like to show, behave in ways that aren't consistent with what I'm feeling, that was actually a really wise insight. That he was trying, in his mind, he was practicing authenticity, where his behavior matched his thoughts and feelings. He also was able to express his concerns about that family member, which we wanted to validate and were legitimate. But then finally, we talked to him about his values, and we talked to him about the value of kindness. And it turned out that he did have a value of kindness, even if he also had the value of authenticity. And we said, okay, maybe you don't love being around this particular family member all the time. Maybe it's not fun for you, but the way you behave can be perceived as unkind to other people. And it was really, once we just took the time to talk to him about it, connect with him about his values, and then we found a value that matched the behavior that we felt might be optimal for him, he was able to pivot and say, oh my gosh, I do have the value of always behaving kindly. I didn't think about the fact that I wasn't behaving in a kind way. Next time we have dinner with this family member, I'm going to behave more engaged, because I never want to act unkind. I always want to act kind. And that may seem weird or kind of goofy, or I don't know if it's new agey. I don't know what that may seem to you, but all I can say is it was a fundamentally different conversation with a fundamentally different outcome when we moved from, sit up straight and act engaged at dinner because that's the way you should act, and that's the way we expect you to act. When we were able to frame it within his value system, his whole demeanor changed, and it became something he was excited about versus something he would have left the conversation resentful about and resistant.
So really what I feel like that story illustrates is what happens when you shift from external, which is, and really what it was saying, we experienced you this way. Is that the way, you want to be experienced? And his response was, that's what I was feeling, right? So, but what we did then was pivot to say, what's important to you? And that shifted it from external, our judgment and what we were hoping for, to him.
What we were expecting of him, right?
Yeah, to him being able to connect with, well, here are my values, and in that situation here. And so then we were able.
He realized he wasn't living up to his own values.
That's right. So shifting it to an internal kind of connection.
Made a difference.
Yes, made a difference. Natasha, do you have something you want to add?
I would just, going back to the little kiddos, just two little thoughts or strategies. One is to just offer a choice that can be helpful. So like, well, would you like to continue to cry out on the couch, or would you like to continue to cry in your room, right? Or, you know, choices that make them feel like they have some say, but they're choices that you're okay with, right? So like, do you want spinach or green beans tonight? Because, you know, we'd like to have a vegetable. And then the other thing is just always ask them for their thoughts. So this is where you start critical thought and solution-focused ideas. So do you have an idea about how we can fix this? Can be a very simple way. Or do you have a thought on how this can get better? Because then, you know, you'll kind of, again, like John was saying, you kind of get a sense of what their ideas or thoughts might be. And even if they're not super realistic, then at least you have some place to start from.
It's so true. And an example of that would be like, even with a 5-year-old or a 4-year-old, let's say you have to go to the store and they're having a meltdown about going to the store. Kids sometimes don't want to go to the store. They want to stay in their PJs, or they want to, even just the process of saying, so here's the deal. I get you don't want to go to the store, you know, and you want PJ time. You know, I'm in this position where I have to go right now. But what's something that you want PJ movie time. So how about we go to the store? It's just like bringing them into their own world. And then when we get home, you can have PJ movie time, or allowing them to kind of show up in their own lives. So it's this balance of structure and bedtimes and meal times. And yes, that's completely appropriate for those kind of, you know, early childhood, middle childhood years. And so you want this structure that's a balance of, you know, as a parent, you do have things you need to get done sometimes, right? But also weighing their needs in there too, and their voices, so that they feel heard as well. And then just make sure that structure in the end is really honoring to them. A bedtime is honoring, right? We can talk about health, and we can talk about, you know, and so being able to recognize, you know, why those things exist, and being able to explain them in a nurturing way to your child.
I love it. All right. Rochelle says she's loving this conversation. Sean Escobar is saying, you guys are so human and I love it. I love humans. Thanks, Sean. Krista writes, my takeaway is, quote, I'm experiencing you in this way. This is what she would say to her child. Mm-hmm. I'm experiencing you in this way. Is that how you meant for me to experience you right now?
Love it.
That's a really great restatement, Krista. Thank you. She also writes, how do you want to be experienced? Those are all really good.
Yes.
So when we've talked about connection so far, we've talked about being connected with yourself, having a desire to connect with your children, asking lots of questions, mm-hmm. really listening to the answers, honoring them, helping them connect with their own values. We've talked about giving options. All those things are some examples of connection. 2
questions that are really easy. I find people like kind of easy go-to scripts is not only, you know, here's what I'm noticing. I'm noticing, you know, that so that phrase, or also, you know, you seem sad. What are you feeling right now? What's going on inside you right now? And you'll find a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old can get there. They really can. Young children can really go there. So those are some examples of, you know, how to get to kind of connection. I'm experiencing, or I'm observing this in you. You know, do you want to tell me do you want to tell me more about what's going on with you, as well as, you know, I'm noticing you're upset, or, you know, can you tell me how you're feeling right now?
There's some great feeling charts that are kind of fun to hang up in a kid's room, or just even have on your phone as something that you can show a kid, like which emoji per se, you know, before
there are like so many. There's some that have so
because
many.
You want to kind of also like complicate feelings. It's not just sad, angry, happy, right? Like there's like a myriad, you know, confused, scared, disgusted, you know, like neutral, calm, like how do you give them a wider variety or a wider vocabulary around feelings?
Yes.
Again, because we're somewhat not fluent in this in general ourselves, right? So variety of emojis. There was emoji charts before emojis.
Right. Right.
Lindy writes, this stuff is gold. Thank you so much. It's so hard to have only one way of parenting because of your upbringing. I always knew there was another way. I just didn't know how to do it. Us too, Lindy.
Yeah,
we're just learning. We're just kind of figuring this out too, and we're all learning together, and we're glad you're along the ride. Trent makes a really important point. He says it might be important to distinguish that these techniques may not always be ideal, effective, or applicable to children with special needs or with an SMI diagnosis. Some parents carry incredible guilt because children with extreme needs are not always typical. Natasha, what is SMI? I'm sorry, I don't know what that is.
I am looking that up as we speak.
So Trent, tell us what SMI means.
I'm so good. I'm so bad at, I can barely just remember things like PTSD. So I'm sure it's something reasonable for us to know.
I'm going to just add, Trent, that's absolutely true. And I'm going to even add it. We told our son Winston that we would be talking about parenting this morning. And Winston said, I have one request. And we're like, oh, really? What's that? He said, tell them two things. Number one, that there's not just one way to parent, that there are lots of ways to parent effectively. And the second is, please tell them that every child is different and that you may need to exercise different approaches with different kids.
That's right.
Very wise. And SMI stands for serious mental illness. So, yes, if you have a kid with an ADD diagnosis, if you've got a kid with oppositional defiant disorder, if you've got a kid with bipolar traits, if you've got a kid with clinical depression even, these are all very, very challenging things. I have several, I'm not going to share who or what, but I have several kids with official diagnoses that we have had to get professional treatment for. And it is very hard to shift your parenting style. And it's something that I recommend that you talk about openly in your family systems, because otherwise then the kids who are not diagnosed or diagnosable oftentimes feel like maybe they're getting special treatment, the other siblings, or why do you parent them differently, or why are there, what they might consider the rules being different. So we talk about not everybody is the same. Not everybody's going to have the same issues or complications, and we are going to parent you as best as we can from kind of an IEP perspective, right? An individual education plan that they do at school. Well, we have an IPP, an individual parenting plan for each kid. And so, it may not always be the same, but we're doing the best we can to meet you where you're at, where your brain functions, where your emotions lie, where your capacities are, and you may not all be able to do the same thing. I also make a lot of metaphors about sports, since my kids are kind of into sports. Like you may have one kid who's doing a lot more effort than another kid, and yet he doesn't jump quite as far as the other kid does, So effort and results are not always correlated, and helping them understand that. And that's why we parent you differently.
Love it.
It's important to have these conversations out in the open.
Kristen, were you going to say something?
Yeah, this idea of differentiation amidst parenting. And I'm so glad that comment came through. And I would also say the techniques from child to child clearly will look differently. And conscious parenting, I would argue, has a place with what you're doing, because I think, especially if you have, a special needs child or a child that falls outside, a box of then it is important that you're aware of your feelings, aware of yourself, because you could be wearing, you could be blazing your own trail with this child per se. And so, that sort of turn to self-awareness is very, very important. And also that truly seeing your child, their brain, how their brain works, how they process information. Those things are still essential in your desire to connect with your child, and in your desire to, choose your reactions as opposed to react.
Kristen asks a really important question that goes along the lines of the special needs point that Trent made, and I have to go answer the door. But here's Kristen's question. I'm going to throw to you guys, and then I'll come back. Kristen asks, what do you do if you have a kid that doesn't like to talk about their feelings? How do you emotionally connect with a kid that doesn't like to talk about their feelings? So you guys go. I'll be right back.
Do you want to take this first, Natasha? Or
I forget that I put myself on mute because of my dogs often. So I'm sorry. I start talking and then I'm like, oh, you can't hear me. Yeah, I think that not all children are going to want to meet you where you are excited to go, right? And so you have I have these personality differences in my own kids. Some kids that are very expressive, some kids that would love to talk for hours, other kids that, you know, you get kind of the grunts. I call it the Chewbacca movement in my house, right? Like the, that's what I get. And that's okay. You know, it's okay to kind of allow them those kinds of general proclivities per se, while at the same time, I still make consistent effort. I make consistent effort. And every now and then with my more introverted or quieter kids, I do get a look into their perspective, you know, maybe on a car ride or something exciting that's happened to them, or, but it's not going to happen as often as maybe with my more extroverted or connective type of kids. So we are kind of wired differently in some of these ways. And at the same time, I always just share things like, I hope that you can talk to me about this. I hope that you can be open. I want you to be able to be expressive. I also notice, is this a trend that is with me or in general? So for instance, we have a kiddo who's very social, not so open with me and dad. Okay, well, so I'm less concerned, right? Less concerned. He's able to be expressive with people of his choosing. For whatever reason, dad and I, you know, with a 16-year-old boy, is not necessarily the place he wants to go deep and, you know, deep and dirty. So that's okay. Now, if he was isolated in every aspect of his life, my concern would maybe be higher. And I would want to, you know, make sure that we're not missing something. Again, if you've got kids on certain spectrums, they may or may not be as interested in, you know, deep dives into emotional connection the way we typically think of that term. Find out how they feel connected. Sometimes feeling connected to some kids is just playing video games side by side, or going on a walk, or doing some type of physical activity like playing basketball out in the basketball hoop, you know, or things like, you don't have to get deep in your emotions to feel connection from your kid, or for your kid to feel connection from you.
I love that. And that has been true for us with our children as well. We have children that really love to like process verbally, could do that for, longer amounts of time. And that's intimacy to them, is sharing that inner world, that inner experience with you. And we have other kids that are very much like, not so much that. If you're with me and we do something together, it's that being together and shared experience. That's, something. So I really appreciate you bringing that up as well.
Yeah, with me, a couple things like timing really matters. So there are some of our kids that hate the mornings and they're grumpy in the mornings. And so we would always we make them breakfast in the morning. So we're like, hi, good morning. Woo! Yeah, like, how are you feeling? And some of them are eager to engage.
I'm with your kids.
Others are like, don't say a word, shut up, leave us alone.
Just trying to get out the door. Yeah.
And same thing, some kids, when they get home from school, want to talk all about their day. And then others don't. The last thing they want to do when they get home from school is to be asked, how was your day today? But then I noticed with one of our kids, he gets really chatty at night, and he turns on at 9:30 or 10. And if I'm busy or tired or disconnected, I won't pick up on that and I'll miss it. And so some of these kids, and this is for Kristen, some of these kids that are quiet or disconnected, some of that's about timing. Not always, but sometimes. I'd also just reflect this idea of doing that you said, Natasha. With one of my kids, I was just wondering, how am I ever going to connect with this kid? And then we started snowboarding, and it cost money. We had to buy boots. We bought snowboards. But I found that on the drives to and from snowboarding and on the lifts, sometimes if I was like, let's have a conversation now. Okay, we're driving. It's time for us to talk. What do you want to talk about? That would ruin it, right? But if I would just be with them enough in some sort of activity that was meaningful, they would, after they were having fun, after they were feeling space, after they were feeling connected, they would let a couple things slip. And so part of it's timing, part of it's creating activities where the communication can happen. And part of that just has to do with them feeling safe and them liking you. If this is something that, again, I'm not naturally fun. I'm not like naturally kids ride on my back and let's play hide and go seek and, ride me like a horsey, on the ground kind of dad.
That's very specific.
I can be that, but it doesn't come naturally to me. And so I tended more to be the dad of like, are you doing your homework? How are your grades? How are you feeling today? Did you do your chores? Oh, your hair looks different, and noticing the problems. And I just noticed that the more I was like controlling, critical, serious business dad, there was just a general lack of good feelings between me and my kids. Whereas the more I would just watch The Simpsons with them, or go snowboarding, or
child-led,
take them to breakfast, or take them to lunch, or go on a walk, whatever their language was, if I would allow it to be organic, allow our relationship to have fun and connection and happiness and joy and time together, then in some instances they would open up. Now, Kristen, again, there are some kids with personality differences or even developmental differences where none of the things I'm about to say are going to be helpful. I'm just saying, in my case, we had one or two kids who didn't like to talk, who didn't like to connect, and these things ended up being helpful for us.
Yes, and another thing I would just add to that is watch how quickly control creeps up, right, in this, that we can become controlling around conscious parenting principles, right? So all of a sudden we're getting upset or feeling fear if our child doesn't connect with their emotions or isn't expressing or isn't. And the whole kind of point here is this idea of invitations. We can provide invitations for our kids to connect, and they may or they may not take them. But I do like this idea of, particularly with younger kids, if you have younger children, and what you're saying is, my children, I have a child that doesn't really go with, want to talk about feelings or connect with feelings. Connect with where they are. Connect with whatever, if they're coloring, or if they're, take some moments to just kind of connect with wherever they are, and watch that sort of control piece that can show up in sort of this way of expectations, right? Because we kind of have operating systems this way in our brain, and they are astute and they are sly, and they can appear even as we try to consciously parent and try to create this new paradigm of connection instead of control. We can get very controlling about our connection.
How not Mormon of us.
That's right. Wherever you go, there you are.
That's right. One thing that I wanted to revisit, there was a question earlier, when we were talking about the values kind of exercise, is this something that you should kind of revisit? And I would say absolutely yes. Mm-hmm. And these are good reasons to revisit. I like documents feeling fluid, like even if you do the Etsy thing and spend a bunch of money on a family proclamation, redo it every few years, that's fine. But as you come up with issues like this, and even somebody I think mentioned something recently about, a kid who likes to play a lot of video gaming and maybe doesn't have a lot of balance in their lives, how do you first have conversations around values? What do we want healthy lifestyles to look like? And how do we make room for entertainment like video games and Netflix and going to the movies and things, instead of, it's the bad, screen time. I think our kids are sick and tired of hearing how screen time is so bad for them. Mm-hmm. So how do we incorporate screen time into our lives in ways that are balanced with physical activity and, schooling and relationships? And And how to, screen time has become more relational. I mean, my kids, I realize now that my house is no longer a private space. Like the kids in the other houses can hear me yelling, like who's done their chores or not, because they're playing some Xbox game. Right. And so I'm like, oh, so they are being relational in ways with their screening oftentimes, but how do we balance, screen time connection with in-person connection, and what's the difference? And having conversations that, you can back up by, again, research or ideas from other people instead of just, this is the way it should be, can be really helpful to then when you are bringing something up, like, hey, I've noticed that you spent a lot of time today on this game and it looks like you really had a good time. Tell me about it. And then also, does that fall into, this balance thing that we all talked about? How are you feeling about that? Or do you feel like you're in balance or not?
Yes.
Oftentimes with one of my kids, they'll immediately get defensive and say, of course I'm in balance. And then a week later, they'll come back and say something like, you know what, I think you're right. I think I need to rethink this or whatever. So again, you're not going to get rewarded all the time immediately using these tactics. Sometimes it takes a minute, a week, a month, a year before some of these things start sifting and influencing your kids in ways that you can see some seeds coming out of the ground that you're happy about.
That's so beautiful. I'm so glad you said that. What were you going to say?
We're getting some great comments from listeners. Penny writes, I invite my kids to weed with me or walk with me or work in the kitchen with me. And amazingly, they sometimes decide to participate, even though they usually don't. I've learned not to be demanding. Inviting can create a surprise. Totally true.
And control can be sniffed out. Like if there's just a little bit of expectation or control in there, it can be sniffed out in a second.
Oftentimes it'll be like, hey, do you want to help me with the dishes? They're like, no. And then if you're like, oh, well, that's rude, blah, 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 then you've lost it. But if you're like, okay, that's fine. And then you let them sit with having told you no, and then you have them watch you do the dishes alone, they'll change their mind and come, but it will have been their own choice, not some emotionally or verbally manipulative thing that you expressed.
Yeah, and another thing that kind of comes up a number of times is this idea, just be aware of times when, it's a very natural thing to come up. But when we were talking about the morning paradigm, our excitement at a new day and really, overly peppy around children that may not be feeling particularly excited about going to school and all that means for them. But, just be aware of when you're asking your children to meet your needs. I think that's something that oftentimes we do. We want that sense of approval and being needed and take care of me so that I'm feeling good. So when they actually have emotions or their own feelings and that differentiation, we can get we can have feelings of rejection. We can have feelings of abandonment. And so to just kind of watch that we're asking, we meet our needs, and we have our own village of people to kind of work with us on that, but we're not having our children have to take care of our needs in that way.
Shefali's really good about that. It's not your kid's job to meet your emotional needs. You go get your emotional needs met. Don't put that on your kids. That's beautiful. A couple other comments that are being made. Let's see. Penny writes, my sons with autism and depression turned on at night, and I am always available for them. It is so fun to interact with them and be silly with them. Sometimes we have serious conversations too.
Nice.
I love it. Karina writes, I have a child that is an introvert and feels more comfortable playing video games online with their peers from school. It's hard trying to find balance and getting that child out of the house to do something. One thing I've tried with Winston lately is playing video games with Winston. It's not, I grew up playing video games. I was probably addicted to video games growing up, but I stopped at some point. So it's not natural for me to play again. But then I realized that if I just sat and played with him for 30 minutes, he may talk about stuff, or he may mention stuff, or more importantly, he just may feel more connected to me, so that if later I say, hey, let's do a chore, or will you help out with this or that, or speak nicer to your mother or me or whatever, he'll be more open because we have that emotional connection. So consider meeting your kids where they are.
I love that. And I also love connecting, maybe trying to gain a little more insight on what the video games what their purpose is or what he loves about them. So ask, what do you love about this game? I noticed that you love to play it. What is it that you love about, video games in general? And what do you love about this video game? I've been surprised when I've done that, with Winston. He has there are deeper reasons. I'm oftentimes surprised at what he's enjoying, whether it was connecting with kids when we moved from the old neighborhood that he missed, or, wanting a break for his brain, or, really getting into a sub story or a subtext, or, it's a great thing to have that information as a parent. And it's even better that they realize, how that video game is showing up for them in their lives and what its purpose is, what it's doing.
Love it. Krista writes something super important. She writes, I'm going to be listening to this episode on repeat. I'm so excited to revisit all of this. Such a powerful conversation. Krista, I just want to reflect that. If you looked at our Shefali Saybury books, it's like scripture should be or should have been. We've read them 5-10 times each. We mark them up. We go back to them. If we're fighting with a kid or in a struggle, we'll find a chapter that relates. Here's the part about teenagers. Here's the part about boundaries. Here's the part about, Linda, you're asking about enforcing consequences. These books have chapters and sections on all these different topics, and we'll revisit them because you don't just learn how to be a good parent. You work over years to develop parenting skills, and it takes repetition. It takes revisiting. It takes reminders. It takes practice. It takes discipline. So yes, listen to this over and over, read those books over and over again. And by the way, Holly's asking for book recommendations. We've posted a lot already in the feed, but Holly, the ones we're recommending most for starters are, at least for me and Margi,
Awakened Family.
The Awakened Family by Shefali Saybury. If you just Google Shefali, Shefali, you'll find these books. The Awakened Family. The second book is Out of Control, and the third book is Conscious Parenting. Those are 3 books by Shefali Saybury that we're highly recommending.
And then that John
earlier Natasha recommended Raising Emotionally Intelligent.
It's great.
What is it, Natasha?
Raising Emotionally Intelligent
Children by John Gottman. Well, I think one of you mentioned it, but Margi.
Raising an Emotionally Intelligent Child, The Heart of Parenting.
It's a great
book. By John Gottman.
And even the concepts of emotional intelligence, I think I listed a book on that as well, just for us as parents to do our own work.
Yes.
So, yeah.
And we have a lot more books that we're going to be recommending because we have just started. It is time to wrap up, and we have only scratched the surface of all the things we want to share with you about parenting. And so we will be coming back next week with more on parenting. We've got a lot of really good things to come, but it is 2:00 and it's time for us to wrap up. So we want to thank everyone who's been enjoying, partnering with us today, sharing their feelings, sharing their thoughts, sharing their experiences, asking questions, sharing their stories and perspectives. And 1 million people have shared their questions and comments and feedback and stories on Facebook and Reddit. We're going to do our best to incorporate all that into future episodes and also into the book that we're writing. So we're really excited about that. We've come to another end of a Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis episode.
We have indeed.
Oh, wow. That tone changed.
Right? It was meant to be kind of funny.
It got very dramatic.
Yeah. We have reached the end. Yes.
Daniel's
I'll do this part this time because I feel like John always does it. But if you find value in these types of podcasts, please consider financially supporting the Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis. It's a standalone project. It's part of the Open Stories Foundation, but it's a standalone project. And if we don't have financial support, then at some point or another, we're going to have to call it good and say, well, it was a good try. As John mentions, it doesn't just help you. It hopefully can be something that will be standing, out here in the internet forever. And so if people come across faith transitions, a year from now, a few years from now, they'll be able to access all of these rich resources that we're trying to create here at Gift of the Mormon Faith Crisis. So please consider a financial donation. We love doing this work, but I'm very comfortable saying I need to be paid for the work that I do. I'm not embarrassed about that or feel guilty about that. I think sometimes coming from our Mormon background, we expect a lot of things for free. We volunteer our times, and we do a lot of that, and I believe in that as part of my value system, but I also believe in my value system of being paid for the work that I do, which I've taken a lot of time, and I know John and Margi also have taken a lot of time to get our educational backgrounds, our processing and experience to be able to give you these types of resources the way that we're able to do. So if you can't do a financial contribution for some reason or another, the next best thing that you can do is offer us a positive review if this is helpful to you. Share the information on social media sites. Participate by offering comments and questions like many of you already do. But for right now, this is not a financially sustainable project, and we definitely want it to be, because we feel like this is an area where so many people need help. We constantly get feedback that people like our stuff and that people want our stuff. So I want to just challenge about having you help pay for our stuff. So, and I do that with love and respect, and I would love to support anything that you create a value too. So
yes.
Any future thoughts about that? Because I feel like, John, you're always asking for that, and I want to be part of that process.
Thank you. And so go to MormonFaithCrisis.com, click on the button there, pick a monthly amount, $10 a month, $25 a month, $100 a month, and you will be helping yourself and you'll be helping other people. And the more monthly donors we have, the more we can kind of schedule these and do them regularly and make it worth everyone's while. So please become a monthly donor. It means the world to us and to other people.
And thank you for joining us. Thanks for sharing all of your insights and being part of this podcast. We love the collaboration.
Absolutely. And so without any further ado, everyone, thanks for joining us. Please give us your comments. Email us at mormonfaithcrisis@gmail.com. Please share this on your walls. Please give us positive reviews. And please join us again soon for another episode. You guys are awesome, and we love seeing you.
Bye.
Stay in touch.
Sounds good. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Natasha.